The Two of Swords is, on the face of it, quite a simple card, and yet it holds within the centre of it a deeply esoteric meaning. On the Rider-Waite card we can see perhaps a more explicit image, this showing choppy waters behind the character, suggesting the inherent conflict of which is present in the suit, and a character of whom appears guarded and rather uncomfortable. She perhaps is about to pass judgment or make a decision, and yet, being blindfolded, cannot actually see where this decision would end up. She hasn't got the right information. She can't see clearly in order to make that decision. On the Tree of Life, this card is found in Shokmar, and this is very interesting, and we will return to this later on in the card. Purely on the Tree of Life, Shokmar, being the second Sephiroth, is very close to Kether, and so it hasn't picked up any of the lower vibrations or the conflict we see in Swords at this stage. This is why Crowley called the card Peace, because on the Golden Dawn Tarot this card was called the Lord of Peace Restored. He didn't like the word restored because he said there hadn't actually been any conflict at this point on the journey. It was merely the suggestion of it to come. And yet the card, if we have a look at it, is quite muted. Its colours are certainly neutral, and that is what the card represents: balance and neutrality. Astrologically, it's the moon in Libra, and these are a harmonious connection in astrology. The moon, of course, being our emotions, our intuition, and our instincts, and Libra being that deep desire for peace, harmony, and balance. And so the moon in Libra suggests that we may have in our hearts a deep longing to find harmony, to find balance in all aspects of our lives. The card itself shows that there has not actually been a conflict, and that peace is what the end goal would be, because the End of the Swords shows images of peace in balance with each other. The first being these angelic figures of which kneel down and pray. One is pointed upwards, the other is pointed down in an act of total balance. Also, very difficult to see on the card, but there is an image of a dove upon each sword, one of the most well-known images of peace and of harmony. And yet, shown in the background of this card and behind the swords are these images of paper pinwheels. These are the type of thing of which would move constantly with the breeze or the wind, sometimes slow and sometimes very rapid, depending upon the mood of the weather. Here they represent the mind, the thoughts. They are the constant chatter or internal monologue of our mind, something of which we cannot truly escape. In meditation we attempt to have no thoughts, or to focus the mind only on one thought. And yet, as Crowley says in Magic in Theory and Practice, the practitioner will find this very difficult. They will focus on, say, a cross in their mind, and soon parts of it will have grown bigger, it will be twisting round, it will be sprouting flowers out of it and growing horns, you name it. The mind will play tricks and will speak to us and pull us in one direction and then the other, so that we are actually not sure what decision to make. Essentially, we're stuck in a state of stalemate, which is something else this card can represent. However, there is something in this card of which suggests the answer and how to move on. Because this card could be like a calm before a storm, a suggestion that there is a peace, and yet it won't last forever. It's just a temporary peace, and eventually we're going to have to make that decision, and yet we don't know how. How do we do it? Well, we can see that the swords are crossed over through this blue rose in the centre, and that the blue rose itself appears to actually be the source of the light of which comes out and forms these patterns in the background. This blue rose is deeply esoteric. It can represent a great many things. Now, Crowley himself, in the Book of Thoth, said that the card represents the influence of the mother, of whose harmonising influence compounds the latent antagonism native to the suit. What does he mean by this? Well, the rose here is suggestive of Sophia, that is the divine Sophia, the heavenly rose, or the celestial rose. She is known in Gnosticism and in various forms of Christianity, and is connected with the Virgin Mary, the Divine Mother, and a type of entity of which has a relationship with us from the very beginning of all creation. And so Shokma is also associated with her, because Shokma is wisdom, and is that divine wisdom, that suggestion of, when we look at the universe, what is it that we are actually beholding? What is it that we're actually seeing? And it may be that it's all connected, and Sophia here could represent that. She could represent that one soul, that one source of life, and yet also the feminine aspect of God, and in that respect connected with what some would call the Holy Spirit, of which may have originally been a feminine mother goddess type of archetype, because the languages of Aramaic and of Hebrew, the language of the Bible, and the language Aramaic actually spoken by Jesus, and the words used to depict this Holy Spirit, such as Ruach, would be feminine, and so they bring us to divine wisdom, and therefore Sophia. Now this rose upon the card has 5 petals coming out of it. Now this returns us to this idea of a divine wisdom and a source of life, and it gets even stranger because it brings us to the tetragrammaton, of which of course is the 4 letters, the Hebrew theonym, the name of God, specifically the letter He, found in the tetragrammaton with the numerical letter of 5, of which suggests the goddess. And so this shows the peace of the goddess and the bringing together. The swords aren't actually piercing through the rose, rather the rose is holding them together. It is uniting them and suspending them, and so we see 2 other knives or daggers holding the moon and holding the symbol of Libra, and so they are suspended temporarily in a state of absolute balance and harmony. And so any conflict that they would have had has been brought to a halt by this influence of the rose, or the influence there of the Divine Mother, as Crowley would say it. And that influence of Shokma, which we saw before, really starts to come out here yet again, because it is not just knowing things, of course, it is wisdom. And it's only the wisdom that's going to allow us to stop those pinwheels from turning round and to actually make the decision. So it's only wisdom that will allow our Rider-Waite version of this card to remove her blindfold and say, I can see clearly now. This central presence of the Divine Mother could also represent the swords cards as a whole, being the child of what has come before. And so we've had fire, we've had water, and now we've got this child which is inherently going to enter a world of conflict, especially coming from fire and water. And so this goddess, this Sophia, this Virgin Mary, however you want to describe it, brings them together and attempts to give them a divine harmony and wisdom. And so when you get this card, it's saying the same thing. You're going to be having trouble knowing which way to go. You can't make the right decision. And it's not something that's going to be a life-threatening decision. It's more like one of those annoying things that you just don't know which way to go. And of course, the way to deal with this is through wisdom, to weigh up the pros and cons of something in a very basic suggestion, and to understand that true wisdom is not the same as information. And so nothing depicts that more clearly than the internet, with these millions of pages of information, every single page of it utterly useless if you can't understand what it means truly and can't apply wisdom to it as well. And so if you just read information, you're missing something, of course. You're missing that vital step, and that's why our character is blindfolded. Everything's in place, but she's missing the insight and the intuition and the correct information. And so really, we have to hold ourselves in that space of stasis. And so on a more negative regard, the card can be a type of stagnant energy, or a passive energy where you're just letting these thoughts come and go. And yet there will come a time when we have to move on, and so we have to step back, hold ourselves in that embrace until that wisdom comes to us, and then we remove our blindfold, see what it is that keeps us here, and able to decide where to place our swords metaphorically, gearing us up to bring peace and harmony into our lives.